Hey, fourth grade. Happy Friday. Let's talk about our assignments first, and then we'll get to reading. So, today, today is Friday, the 27th. You have book club reading due. You should have your next chunk read by Monday. You should have your typed American Revolution paragraphs submitted to the Google Classroom folder. There is a math quiz for you to complete. And today your second step video and written response is due in Google Classroom. Lastly, the only thing you have due today for science is that your animal project is due. You need a hand-drawn picture of your animal along with a paragraph. Either typed or written is fine with me, into the science folder. So, the last time we read, we stopped at another pretty juicy part. So, we know that Jeffrey McGee, Maniac McGee, is kind of going around this town, and people are noticing him for different reasons. And where we stopped is at the end of this Little League baseball game. This character named McNabb was kind of intimidating all the other players, lining them up, making them try to hit his fastball. He only has one pitch, which is a fastball, and with that, Maniac McGee steps up to the plate, and McNabb is like, "Oh no, you're not on the team, you can't play." And Maniac's like, "Hey, like, all I need is like a part of your uniform." So Maniac goes off, finds a hat from one of the players, and McNabb's like, "Fine, you can try to hit my fastball." And of course, what happens? Maniac McGee has this awesome hit, and McNabb is not too happy about it. So where we stopped is that Maniac is once again disappearing, and Maniac McGee is not making friends with this other character, McNabb. So, McNabb was gaping at the kids, who was still standing all calm and cool, waiting for the next pitch. Finally, a sort of grin slithered across McNabb's lips. He roared, "Get my hat! Get my ball!" 10 kids scrambled onto the field, bringing him the hat and ball. McNabb had it figured out. He was so busy laughing at the runt. He lobbed him a lollipop, and the runt got lucky and pulled it. This time McNabb wasn't laughing. He fingered the ball, tips digging into the red stitches. He would be fired, he thought. Man, that sucker's going so fast, even I can hardly see it. Then he was looking up, turning, following the flight of the ball, which finally came down to earth in deep left center field and bounced off to the fence. Can't you picture that? So McNabb, once again, is feeling really confident in himself. You know, he's kind of intimidating that way on the pitcher's mound. And he is like, "Oh, I'll try again, and I'll get him this time." But no, Maniac McGee hits the ball all the way to the fence. More silence, except from someone who yelled, "Yep!" Then caught himself. "Ball!" bellowed McNabb. He was handed the ball. He slammed his hat to the ground. His nostrils flared. He was breathing like a picadored bull. He windmilled, reared, lunged, fired. This time the ball cleared the fence on the fly. No more holding back. They were anxious now more. 3 more pitches, 3 more runs. Pandemonium on the sidelines. It was raining red and green hats. McNabb couldn't stand it. The next time he threw, it was right at the kid's head. The kid ducked. McNabb called, "Strike 1!" Next pitch headed for the kid's belt. The kid bent his stomach around the ball. "Strike 2!" Strike 3 took dead aim at the kid's knees. And here was the kid, swooping back and at the same time swatting at the ball like a golfer teeing off. It was the craziest baseball swing you ever saw. But there was this ball smoking out to center field. "Hold it, runt!" gnarled McNabb. The kids on the sidelines made way as McNabb stopped off the field, past the dugout, and into the woods between the field and the creek. They waited for a pretty long time. At last, McNabb was back on the mound, fingering the ball in his mitt, a demon's gleam in his eye. He wound up, fired. The ball headed for the plate. And what's this? A leg ball? It's got legs. Long legs. Pinwheeling towards the plate. It wasn't a ball at all. It was a frog. And McNabb was on the mound, cracking away. And the kid at the plate was bug-eyed. Nobody'd ever tried to hit a fast frog before. So what did the kid do? He bunted it. He bunted the frog, laid down a perfect bunt in front of the plate, third base side, and he took off for first. He was halfway to second before McNabb jolted himself into action. The kid was trying for an inside-the-park home run bunt, and the rarest feat in baseball, something that had hardly ever been done with a ball and never with a frog. And to be the pitcher who let such a thing happen, well, McNabb could already feel his strikeout record fading to a mere grain in the sandlot of history. Ooh, I like that picture, that metaphor. So if history was all those little moments, just like sand, his triumph, McNabb's, is getting smaller, like a grain of sand. So he lumbered off the mound after the frog, which was now hopping down the third base line. As a matter of fact, it was so close to the line that McNabb had a brilliant idea. Just heard the frog across the line, and it would be a foul ball. Well, frog. Instead of taking a left turn at the shoe, jumped over it and hopped on towards third base. That frog did. He was heading for the green fields of left, and the runt kid, sounding like 2 runners with his flap-soled shoes and the bottoms of his feet, was chucking dust for third. Only one hope now. McNabb had to grab the frog and tag the runner out. But now the frog shot through his legs over to the mound and now towards shortstop. Now towards second. And McNabb was lurching and lunging, throwing his hat at the frog, throwing his glove. Everybody was screaming, and the kid was rounding third and digging for home. And unbefroggable, the ball was heading back home too. The ball, the batter, the pitcher, all racing for home plate. And it was the batter, the new kid out of nowhere, who crossed the plate first, at the same time scooping up his ball, his book, twirling his borrowed red cap back to the cheering others, and jogged on past the empty stands, up the hill to the boulevard. McNabb gasping, croaking after him, "Don't stop till you're out of town, run! Don't tell me ever catch ya!" And that's how Jeffrey McGee knocked the world's first frog ball for a four-bagger. Chapter 8. And how he came to be Maniac. The town was buzzing. The schools were buzzing. Hallways, lunchrooms, streets, playgrounds, West End, East End, buzzing about the new kid in town. Stranger kid, scraggly, carrying a book, flap-soled sneakers, the kid who intercepted Brian Dennehy's pass to hands down and punted it back longer than Dennehy himself ever threw. The kid who rescued Arnold Jones from Finsterwald's backyard. The kid who tattooed giant John McNabb's fastball for half a dozen home runs. Then circled the sacks on a bunted frog. Nobody knows who said it first, but somebody must have. Kid's gotta be a maniac. And somebody else must have said, yeah, a regular maniac. And somebody else, yeah. And that was it. Nobody, except Amanda Beale, had any other name for him. So pretty soon, when they wanted to talk about the new kid, that's what they called him. Maniac. The legend had a name. But not an address, at least not an official one with numbers. What he did have was the deer shed at the Elmwood Park Zoo, which is where he slept his first few nights in town. What the deer ate, especially the carrots, apples, and day-old hamburger buns, he ate. He started reading Amanda Beale's book his second day in town, and finished it that afternoon. Ordinarily, he would have returned it immediately, but he was so fascinated by the story of the Children's Crusade that he kept it and read it the next day, and the next day. When he wasn't reading, he was wandering. When most people wander, they walk. Maniac McGee ran. Around town, around the nearby townships, always carrying the book, keeping it in perfect condition. This is what he was doing with his life, as it often seemed to do, took an unexpected turn. Chapter 9. John McNabb had never in his life met a kid he couldn't strike out, until the runt. Now, as he thought about it, he came to two conclusions. One, he couldn't stand having this blemish on his record. or a not good thing, a spot. 2, if you beat a kid up, it's the same as striking him out. Well, at least we know what John's intentions are. Not good, though. So McNabb and his pals went looking for the kid. They called themselves the Cobras. Nobody messed with them. At least nobody in the West End. The Cobras had heard that the kid hung around the park and the tracks, and that's where they spotted him one Saturday afternoon. On the tracks by the path that ran from the Oriole Street dead end to the park. He came down by Red Hill and headed away from them, book in hand, as usual. But the Cobras just stood there, stunned. "I don't believe it," one Cobra said. "Must be a trick," said another. "I heard about it," said another, "but I didn't believe it." "It wasn't a trick. It was true." The kid was running on the rail. McNabb scooped up a handful of track stones. He launched one. He snarled, "He's dead. Let's get him." By the time Maniac looked back, they were always on him. He wobbled once, leaped from the rail to the ground, and took off. He was at the Oriole Street dead end, but his instincts said no, not the street. Too much open space. He stuck with the tracks. Coming into view above him was the house on Racco Hill, where he had eaten spaghetti. He could go there, too, the whistling mother, the other kids, be safe. They wouldn't follow him in there, would they? Stones clanked off the steel rails. He darted left, skirted the dump, wove through the miniature mountain range of stone piles and into the trees, skiing on his heels down the steep bank and into the creek, frogs plopping, no time to look for stepping stones. Yells behind him now, war whoops. Stones pelting the water, stinging his back. On the other side, through the trees, the pricker bushes, past the armory jeeps, and out to the park boulevard, past the Italian restaurant on the corner, the bakery, screeching tires, rows of houses, streets, alleys, cars, porches, windows, faces staring, faces. Faces. The town whizzed past Maniac, a blur of faces. Each face staring from its own window, each face in its own personal frame, its own house, its own address, some place to be when there was no one, no other place to be. How lucky to be a face staring out from that window. And then, could it be? The voices behind him were growing faint. He slowed, turned, stopped. They were lining up at a street, a black block. They were still yelling and shaking their fists, but they weren't allowed off the curb. And now they were laughing. Why were they laughing? The Cobras were standing at Hector Street. Hector Street was the boundary between East and West End. Oh, I know why they stopped. What's the difference between the people on the East End and the people on the West End? A few chapters ago, we talked about segregation and how they were grouped together, and they had very specific things and places that they could go, that they were welcome, that they were safe historically. Now I understand why the Cobras stopped. Or, to put it another way, between the blacks and whites, Not that you ever saw white in the East End or black in the West End. People did cross the line now and then, especially if they were adults and it was daylight. But nighttime? Forget it. And if you were a kid, day or night, forget it. Unless you had business on the other side, such as sports team or school. But don't be strolling around. And if you belonged there, as if you were afraid, as if you didn't even notice you were a different color from everybody around you, the cobras were laughing because they figured the silly, scraggly runt would get out of the East End in about as good shape as a bare big toe in a convention of snapping turtles. Wow. So Maniac McGee, you have to think, is he in the safe part of town or is he not safe? And you have to think about how much just the color of people's skin was their identity, not just judging people by what they did or how they acted, those kind of things, but it was just by looking at them. People were identified just by the color of their skin. That is a social issue, a social experience in our history. Fourth grade, I know I went over just a little bit, but I appreciate you being flexible with me. And I hope you enjoyed the link I sent you yesterday about the Smithsonian virtual field trip. Feel free to go visit that site as much as you like because there's tons of things to see. There's a lot of resources and fun things to watch. Feel free to email me. Let me know what questions you have and the best ways I can support you. And I'll see you on Monday. Have a great night, fourth grade.